While there is not much information about Robert Frazier's early life, we do know a few things leading up to his role as the first mascot of Auburn University. Robert Frazier was born in 1873 to William Frazier, a farmer, and his mother, Dora Eccles, a maid. Together, his parents, who undoubtedly experienced enslavement, instilled important work ethics into his livelihood that he would carry all the way into his adulthood. He worked as a butcher at a meat market, though this and many other jobs weren't mentioned in the federal census, including farming. Instead, the census had him working as a porter at the university. He had some experience as an athlete, but he still couldn't compete at the high school or college level because there were no African American schools in Auburn until 1928. Robert Frazier was married to Dotsie Hall in 1899. Together they had 10 children, 6 boys and 4 girls, forcing him to hold several jobs, including being a longtime employee for the Auburn Athletics Department. Some of his children, Henry, Robert, and William Frazier, worked for Auburn University. His older boys worked as janitors, butchers, and farmers, and the girls worked as cooks or maids. They owned a large family home on Glen Avenue worth about $5,000. At the time, this was a large investment. After his death, many of his children continued living in their West Glen family home as late as 1940. Robert clearly valued education, as every member of his family learned to read and write. This was uncommon for the time, and it shows he truly wanted a better life for his children. During Robert's time working for Auburn University, he worked several jobs like athletic trainer, equipment worker, rubber down boy, water boy, mud boy, and was occasionally selected for the role of mascot. At the time, Auburn was one of the largest employers of African Americans, but they were mostly relegated to service jobs. During his tenure as a mascot for Auburn's football team, he was given the nickname Bob Sponsor, though the term sponsor was generally only used for female students who danced around at games. Records state he danced and paraded around the stadium whilst being cheered and booed by respective audiences. He was said to be well liked, though it is clear he was not respected by the community, and he was a friend to Auburn students. At Auburn, he was heavily discriminated against. One time at Auburn's first game against Georgia in 1892, Coach George Petrie chose Frazier as the team's mascot. Initially, Georgia wanted to choose Lewis Green, an elderly blind black man who lived outside of the stadium. Georgia chose to use a goat instead, resulting in a comparison of Frazier to that of an animal. 1892 was not the last time he would be degraded at a football game, as in 1912 his beloved Auburn Tigers left him in Atlanta, resulting in him being shipped to Auburn in a box on instructions from the Georgia team. Even though Frazier's contributions to Auburn athletics go unrecognized, he was an integral part of Auburn's early football teams and can be seen as a pioneer of African American involvement in Auburn athletics before the integration of the university in 1964. The first black athletes did not arrive until 1968 with the arrival of Henry Harris, the first black basketball player, James Owens in 1969, the first black football player on scholarship, and Thomas Gossam Jr. in 1971, the first black athlete in the SEC to walk on, earn a scholarship, and graduate. Frazier fell ill after the 1920 season, and Auburn students paid for his treatment in Atlanta, but it was unsuccessful. Auburn students then paid for his treatment in Mobile. His condition never improved, and he wanted to return to Auburn to die. He passed away on June 19, 1921. He was buried the next day in Baptist Hill Cemetery, the first primary black cemetery in Auburn. Frazier was a member of the Mosaic Templars of America, one of the largest black fraternal organizations at the time, founded by 2 formerly enslaved persons. The Templars provided business and nursing schools and physical education classes to the community. The funding for his funeral came mostly from Auburn students, showing they truly cared for him. His gravestone had an engraving from the Templars, the same fraternity Booker T. Washington belonged. Washington and Frazier shared the same values of education and self-improvement, and it is fitting his headstone still bears the mark of their shared fraternity, the Mosaic Templars. He was seen as one of the most prominent African Americans in athletic circles at the time. He worked with Auburn University and athletics decades before integration and before black athletes. Through the discrimination he faced, he continued to work with Auburn University, whether this was for his love of athletics or the love of his family. He continued to work regardless. Frazier was known throughout the town, and he was truly an Auburn man, and cared about the African American community through his membership with the Templars. He's part of Auburn's history, even if it is seen as a negative side. In the past, his contributions weren't recognized, as he was seen as more of a form of entertainment rather than a human being. Today, Auburn still fails to recognize Frazier's contributions to avoid the negative attention their history of discrimination would bring. While it may be negative attention to the university, it is important to celebrate Robert Frazier and the history of Auburn.